Now, so I'm a fan of Vsauce. You know that guy. Hey, Vsauce, Michael here.
Where are
again,
your
that's
fingers?
also another question I have. If he's calling us Vsauce, are we Vsauce? Because he's saying Michael here. He's not saying he's Vsauce. So he's not saying like, hey YouTube Vsauce here. He's saying, hey Vsauce Michael here. Are we Vsauce? Food for thought. Basically says, yeah, at what point does a chair stop being a chair? Which is a really good question, actually. Like, let's say you take like a bit of, you take an atom off every time. At what point, at what atom does it stop being a chair? Like, when does that stop being real? When does it stop being a chair? I haven't really got any more to add to that one. What was I gonna say on it? Valid. That's a good answer. That's a good answer. For the rest of your legs. That's a good definition of a chair. That is a good definition of a chair. I understand. What isn't a chair? Ooh. I guess something you can't sit on, like, at all, ever. Like, the sun's not a chair because you'll die before reaching it. But interestingly, black holes can be chairs. You can sit down inside a black hole. But then what's the scale? Because, like, you can call Earth a chair because you can sit on the Earth, but that's because we're bound to it. Yeah, so yeah, a black hole could be a chair because once you go in a chair, let's assume you're immortal. Let's assume you're immortal and you can't die. Okay? If you go inside a black hole, you actually stay there until the end of time. You can just sit down. You just take a seat. But then also, very paradoxically, that opens up an intersect of things that are and aren't chairs. Stay with me now. Stay with me. Because if you think, something you can sit on, if that's classified as a chair, however, it's not sold as a chair. For example, a bed. A bed isn't a chair literally, but it can be metaphorically. When does a surface go from ground to chair? Ooh. Yeah, does a chair require elevation? But then relative to what? Elevation relative to, like, the ground? But then what's the ground? Because the ground fluctuates in elevation all the time. Does that mean you're only truly on the ground at sea level? But then what happens if you go under sea level? Are caves negative chairs? Well, atoms don't touch where everything's raised. They may not touch, but they can exist on the same, like, y-coordinate. And then they wouldn't be raised. That brings relativity into it, because, like, raised at the atomic level, raised relative to what? Other atoms? But then what are those other atoms raised to relatively? Because atoms are directionless. An atom doesn't know a concept of up and down. But I want to explore the negative chair concept a bit more. Yeah, like, what would constitute as a negative chair? Would it be just something that is below sea level? If you're relative to the Earth, below sea level means you are at a negative elevation. Therefore, if you sit down under the sea, you're on a negative chair. Yeah, I was going to say, I think, would a chair be something that you sit on below sea level, or would a chair be something that de-elevates you? Like a hole. So is a hole a negative chair? Because a chair had to elevate you. But yeah, what, so are we saying a chair does not have to necessarily elevate you? What if, hear me out on this, what if a chair could theoretically de-elevate everything around you? Would that be a chair? Would you then be sitting on a chair, or would you just be surrounded by negative chairs? Small chair can't elevate you, but can elevate something small. Is a chair relative? I think so. I think what constitutes as a chair is relative. Following the abstraction of it just being something that raises you above your original position relative to the ground. If we say the elevation is a constant, the size that constitutes as a chair would be relative. Because obviously, like, let's say you got, like, a really small object. on a chair this tall, that's not going to be a chair for me. But for it, it's going to be a chair. We might actually be, like, this is what Socrates was on about. Does something need to be alive to be sitting on a chair? Is a rock on a chair sitting? I think to answer this question, we need to bring in Schrodinger's cat. Hear me out on this. Alright, okay. So, you know what I'm saying? You all know Schrodinger's cat. If I do not know if the cat is dead or alive until I look inside the box. You know that one. That one. Like, that whole thing. Well, what if there's actually a chair in there? I do not know. The dead or alive cat is sitting on the chair until I'm looking inside the box. At what point is someone just on top of the chair rather than sitting? The word sit is a verb and you're actively sitting. So, how can a non-living thing actually be actively doing something? Hang on. There's a word for this. Anthropomorphism. Look, I don't mean furries. This is also about... This says the attributes of human form, character, or attributes to non-human entities. That includes rocks. Rocks aren't humans. If you want to get like that, you can technically say a rock is sitting on a chair. Yeah, let's say it's a plush instead of a rock. So it's like, yeah. How much does something need to look like it's sitting to sit? I think as long as it's on the chair, it's sitting. I fear we may have reached a wall with this line of thinking. Let's take it back to being a little bit less abstract. What counts as a chair, part-wise? Like, at what point, for example, does a chair become a stool? Is it just when the back's taken off? But then what counts as the back? Because even if you take the back off, there's still going to be remnants of the back. So the back's never truly gone. So can a stool, there used to be a chair, ever be considered anything other than a chair? See, I would think they were two separate things. But that must mean there's something in the back that makes the chair a chair. I think that's the question we must ask ourselves at this stage. What power does the back have of a chair? But then the same thing can also be applied. Let's say you got a particularly comfy chair, particularly fancy chair, and you got a cushion on it. If you take the legs away, when does the chair stop being a chair, and when does it start becoming a cushion? Well, then is it more everything is a stool than everything is a chair? Perhaps it is, but stools are variations of a chair. Because stools are just a chair with the back taken off. Or at least in some cases. The back isn't required to be a chair. Okay. So stools are chairs. So the back actually holds no power. This is good to know. This is good information to know. Is a cushion a chair? Does it need to be a specific size to be a chair? And I think this leads back onto Kurt's point. Because beanbags, you can get beanbag cushions. You get beanbag cushions. But they're chairs. Are cushions chairs? Is a small cushion a chair, and does it not lift you up enough? Exactly. How much lift does a chair have to have for it to be a chair? Is a chair proportional to how much it lifts you? Yeah, is there like a chair level? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, there's got to be like, there's a level of chair, and if it doesn't lift you up enough, it's not chair enough. Can something be 50% chair? That's a good question. Yeah, what would make something half a chair? Yeah, hang on. Pause. I just had a revelation. This leads on to super tasks. Let me explain. So a super task is something that, given a finite amount of time, can be done, but requires an infinite amount of steps. Think like this. If you cut a cake in half, you got 2 minutes to do this, by the way. You cut it in half, you wait 1 minute before the second cut. Cut it in half again, you now only wait 30 seconds. So the time between cuts is halving, and you keep going to infinity. You will have cut it an infinite amount of times by the time 2 minutes rolls around. That's just how it's going to work. That's just how it works, because the time keeps halving and halving and halving. However, this does lead on to a finite area that you can frost the cake, you can do whatever you want to cake. You've cut it an infinite amount of times. You've somehow given it an infinite volume, an infinite length as well, because you've been able to cut it an infinite amount of times. But it's still only a finite area. What about a chair? If you cut a chair in half, that's still a chair. You can sit on the other half. You might be a little bit wobbly. You might have some stability issues, but you'll have 2 legs. You'll have a back. You'll have a seat. You'll have a chair. So what happens if you cut it in half again? Same rules still apply. You'll still have the legs will still be in half, but you still have a chair. And again, and again, and again. How small can chairs go? You could cut a chair an infinite amount of times, and it would still be a chair. Even subatomically, you can cut a chair an infinite amount of times, and it will still be a chair. You could do that anyway, because we've just explained ourselves. A chair counts as a bit you sit on. You can sit on anything. Anything's a chair. Take the back off, it becomes a stool. A stool's a type of chair. Is it a chair in name or a chair in use? Well, I've kind of been considering a chair to be something that if it meets certain criteria, it is a chair. In practicality, no, you'd not be able to sit on it, but this is all theoretical anyway. You cannot have an infinitely small chair. Just like you cannot have an infinitely small slice of cake. It has to be finite. So, theoretically, let's say you've got an infinitely small person sitting on the infinitely small chair. That'd still be a chair to them. That'd still be a chair to them because it's proportional. And that leads on to the whole thing of proportionality. A chair is only a chair if you can sit on it. If you can't sit on it, it's not a chair. Relative to you, it's not a chair. Chairs are relative. Chairs are relative. That's my final answer. Chairs are a relative concept. If it's too big for you, that's not a chair. If it's too small for you, that's not a chair. It's just right for you. That's a chair. We're calling that Goldilocks' chair theory. Thank you very much. I've been CurtbroG. Let's play some Minecraft. What is too big or too small? Okay. So, too small, I would constitute as A, you either crush the chair, or B, you fall off the chair because it is too small. For being too big, if I stand up, yeah? If I would then have to climb or do anything above this area of my body, that is too big. If I can go like that onto the chair, that's fine. That's either good enough or too small. However, if I have to like kind of go like that and then like try and prop myself up, that's too big. Is a ledge a chair? Oh, because it's connected to something. It's connected. The ledge is connected to something. Would that make buildings chairs as well? Like internal chairs? Like you've got a ledge inside a building. Would that be an internal chair? If I sit on the side of a cliff, is that cliff a chair? Well, if we go to the whole elevation gain theory, then the whole cliff is a chair because it raises you above sea level. Is the whole world a chair because we can sit anywhere? Okay, new theory unlocked. Grand chair theory. This is the theory that states the entire world is a chair relative to the universe. Factual? Yes. If we want to follow our line of thinking, yes. The whole world is a chair because our net elevation gain is 0. Relative to everything else in the universe, it's also 0. When does ground go to chair? Can the edges of ground count as a chair but the center of ground cannot? That's a really good question. So I think for it to be a chair, it'd have to be the edge of something. Put under sea level at the beginning and get a really tall chair. Because of Goldilocks chair theory, that's not possible. That's not a chair for you. Because if it's a really tall chair, because relative to you it's too big. Does a ledge count as a chair, or is a ledge something different from a chair? I think for it to be a chair, it'd have to be a standalone thing. It'd have to be movable, independent of anything else. Climb up it, get on top, then sit on it. Is it a chair? No. To sit on a chair, it first must be below you. If you have to reach or you have to climb, that is not a chair. That is a ledge. That is something to climb. That is not a chair. From your new position. Let's say it's almost like an elevator, where you go onto it. You're now on a different floor. You now match the height of the chair. That would then be a chair to you. However, if you were at the bottom if you were on the initial frame of reference at the bottom, that'd be far too tall. You'd have to redefine your position elsewhere. So it's not a chair until you can sit on it. Which then leads on to quantum superposition. Again, hear me out on this. So quantum superposition is basically a quantum particle is in all possible states at once until directly observed. Think what we just described with chairs. With a chair, it is in all possible states of being able to be sat on or not sat on by anything, anywhere. Right? Until you're at the height where you can sit on it. Then you can sit on it. Is there any way to Newton flaming laser sword this? Yes. Wait, what is it? Yeah, if it can't be proven by experiment, there is no need for debate. Experiment! Formulation of the experiment, okay? How you're going to do this is very simple. If you can sit down on it without having to climb, it's a chair. You know what? No, I'm going full scientist on this. Let's get a Google Doc open. So, we're going to introduce these things called postulates. These are basically things that are like the rules of the theory, okay? The rules of the theory. So, to be a chair, it must be lower than the relative height of the observer. It must give you elevation gain relative to your starting position. And all chairs are relative to the size of the observer. Fourth postulate. To be a chair, it must move independently of any other object or system. So it can't be attached to something. Implications of the postulates. Chairs cannot be bigger than the observer. I mean it in the sense of like, if a building has a ledge, that's not a chair. That's part of the building. Wait, so if baby's high chair. Chair. Wait. No! No, because relative to the baby, it's too big. It still works. We're going to have to introduce a fifth postulate here. The observer must be able to independently get in the chair. Babies don't independently get in high chairs. Is a normal sized chair not a chair for a baby? No. Too big. Hang on. I'm going to add a new thing. Proposals. 3 types of round. Surface, chair, and ledge. Chairs are social constructs. If you want to get really abstract, chairs don't exist. Chairs will always increase elevation gain. A chair for one person may not be a chair for another. Seating attached to buildings are not chairs. High chairs are not chairs. Stairs? Stairs is an entire thing? Yes. Because at any point where you're sitting on the chair, on the stair, you will have gained elevation compared to the floor. So yeah, stairs are chairs. Is a chair in a hole a chair? So, would this count as a chair? The answer, now with the reworded postulate, is yes. Because if that chair wasn't there, we would be sitting on the green at the bottom, yeah? But now that now the chair is there, we're sitting well above the green that's on the bottom. So that is a chair. And that is all the postulates satisfied as well. What if the chair is in space? This is now going on to Einstein's theory of relativity. So, he has a postulate where the speed of light is the same in all inertial frames of reference. We're going to reword that to include chairs. So, the concept of a chair is the same in all inertial frames of reference. What does that mean? If you got to be relative to something, yeah? If there's no ground, but you're still relative to something. Let's say you're on the International Space Station. You somehow get a chair, and you're now sitting in space on a chair, but you're still relative to the International Space Station. You would still be sitting on a chair. Because if you weren't sitting on the chair, the tether holding you to the ISS would be strained slightly further. Meaning that this would provide some elevation gain or some elevation relief. There would be no such thing as elevation in space. It would be more just relative distance, because there's no direction in space. It's all directionless. Do horses count as chairs? No, it violates the first postulate. You have to like get on a horse. It would only be a chair if you were bigger than the horse. Yeah, a horse would be a ledge. If the chair is alive and changes position, can it become a chair? If it's stationary, then yeah, it'd be a chair. Yeah, it would transition from ledge to chair at some point. You could almost think of this as the 3 states of matter for chairs. And then the transition point is like the plasma of the chair. Human cannon? No, it would not be. Because you'd have to get in the cannon. Human cannonball at the circus is not a chair because it violates the 5th postulate of the Goldilocks chair theory. That actually might be the first time that sentence has ever been said. How they get into them is an important distinction. Yeah, no, complete violation. Complete violation. He's grabbing it. This is a ledge. This has been the most elaborate and longest bit I've ever done on this channel. A surface, ground in which a chair is not present. So this is the floor. Ledge. Right, chairs that violate one or more postulates. What about these things both ways? Oh, good question. Good question. Let's get the postulates up. So, lower than the observer relative to the observer. If you're taller than it, it's a chair. First postulate stands. Second postulate stands. Third postulate stands. Fourth, fifth. Yeah, so if you were taller than this, yes, that would be a chair. Inside, however, it must be lower than the observer relative to the observer. If we're taking the whole object into account, if you were inside of it, you'd have all this space above you. It would not be a chair. That brings up more questions because what? So now there's like not only the anti-chairs, there's like inverted chairs where you're inside it instead of outside it. Would Yoshi be a chair? Yeah, sound is a chair. Yoshi's a chair. Chicken jockey, chair. Horse logic, it's a ledge. The chicken of the chicken jockey is a ledge because the baby zombie is not tall enough to get on it independently. What if by sitting on said chair, the chair gives way and breaks? Well, I think at the instant of breaking, it becomes an anti-chair briefly because then you start de-elevating. Because once you sit on a chair, that chair becomes your new surface. So, for it to be classified as a chair again, you'd have to be an elevation gain. This is actually, like, it's making too much sense. Anti-chair is the in-between phase. Yeah, so sitting on an anti-chair is the process of de-elevation. You are losing elevation, which is what an anti-chair makes you do. Kratos could be a chair, therefore he's a chair. I'm not a chair, bro. I'm not a chair. Okay, so assuming George is the observer. To be a chair, must be lower than the observer relative to the observer. Okay, so I'm 6'4", George is 6'6". So yeah, that's valid. Elevation gain, yes, that's valid. That one is kind of a given. I can move independently. Question is, would he be able to seat himself independently? I think this is as far as we can take the theory for now. Right, I think this is enough for today. So, thank you for watching. Keep on to gaming. I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye. My voice. You guys can tell my voice off. Bye-bye.